So let me go ahead and start this. And Daddy is going to give a lecture while he's doing your hair. All right, little dude?
Okay.
All right. So, for all of my students who are in my class that'll be watching this video later, just know that I'm doing my son's hair as of right now. So, I'm trying to find the time where I can actually do his hair, do the things that I need to do, grade papers and everything else, and get that stuff done. And this is for my class that I'm teaching at the University of the People,
Ooh.
which is the Introduction to Sociology. And this is on the chapter 7, which is to the Introduction to Deviance, Crime, and Social Control. So if you're joining on TikTok and you just want to stay here, you're more than welcome to stay. I'm just going to be talking about sociology and deviance, crime, and social control, and everything that has to do with the book that we're studying out of, which is Connerly. And it's a book that's an open book that anybody can have access to. If you go to the YouTube channel, you'll be able to see what book it is, and it's free of charge. It's open stacks, and you can just kind of get the book if you want to just follow along. But also, this will be recorded and put up on YouTube as well. So this is streaming live on YouTube right now as it is on TikTok. So this is basically just my course with the University of People on the Introduction to Sociology. I'm probably going to be doing a few of these because at some point in time I have to be able to sit back and be able to do some of my classwork, and I don't always get a chance to do it. And that means teaching. And with online classes, you don't always get to teach. You get to sit down and check discussion posts and check essays and put up announcements every now and then. It's rather boring. I prefer actually to teach, and my students have preferred that I do some of that as well. So I'm doing whatever I can right now to make it a more accessible learning environment for them.
Yes.
And so I'm going through this little experiment right now to see how this works out for the rest of my class. So with that being said, let me just go ahead and start with chapter 7, section 1. And so when you think about deviance, you start with the simple idea that it is not the act itself that makes something deviant. It is the reaction, actually. And Connerly and colleagues are very clear on this point. So societies create norms, and norms define expectations. And anything that falls outside of those expectations becomes labeled as deviant. So you can see this anytime you cross cultural boundaries. So what counts as too loud or too friendly or even too distant shifts depending on where you are. And that fluidity is the first clue that deviance is socially constructed. So deviance also varies by time. Something that scandalized people in the 1950s could not raise an eyebrow today. And I think you see a lot of that with our political situation as of right now. Let's say, for instance, like tattoos are a great example. Once they were associated with criminality or, low status. And they are now common amongst professionals and teachers and even judges. Norms evolve, which means deviance evolves with them. So once societies define deviance, they have to manage it. That is where social control comes in. Social control is essentially the toolkit a society uses to guide, shape, and correct behavior. Some of it is quiet and subtle. And if you think about the stare someone gives you when you cut in a line, or the feeling, Xavier, will you stop that? Or the feeling is my son. he's playing with his cup. Or the feeling, you get when your phone goes off in a meeting and everyone turns towards you. So those are informal sanctions, and no one writes you a ticket for it, but you feel the pressure. Xavier, are you wanting to be part of the class, little guy? All right. So other times, social control is formalized. Laws, rules, policies, official punishment kicks in when a behavior crosses the boundary that society has coded into law. So if you steal, the state can fine or imprison you. If you violate workplace rules, you might lose your job. And schools, courts, religious bodies, governments participate in the formal regulation of behavior. So what is interesting is that deviance is not always negative. Sometimes it is vital. Societies depend on certain forms of deviance to drive change. So look at activists who challenged segregation laws. They violated formal rules, but their actions pushed the system to confront injustice. Boy, you got a lot of hair, little guy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mom got a lot of hair for me. I don't know.
So deviance can be a social signal that something in the system is not functioning well. So Durkheim argued that deviance helps clarify moral boundaries and even strengthens group solidarity when people react collectively to it. So think about how groups basically create their own micro standards. High school cliques and religious communities, union halls, fraternity houses, online communities all define what is acceptable inside their group. So you step outside of it and you might get ridiculed. And you might get excluded or you might get punished. And so that is social control operating at the micro level. So, but the flip side is that people in groups with more power usually influence behaviors become labeled deviant in the first place. So this becomes clearer as we look at crime, for instance, right? The behaviors that get criminalized often reflect the interests of more powerful social groups. For example, the same substance can be illegal in one context, legal in another, and depending on who the law is constructed to protect or penalize, that does not come from biology or natural law. That comes from social power. So, one of the most recognizable examples today is how different communities experience policing. A behavior like loitering might be ignored in an affluent neighborhood and is treated as suspicious in a marginalized one. Keep your head still, little guy. Dad has almost done with this braid, okay? And so the norm is the same, but the enforcement is uneven. And I think a lot of people see that now, even when it comes down to immigration as of right now. What was once acceptable maybe 10 years ago is not so acceptable now, but the policing between one group is different between that group and another group. So the chapter also touches on how society uses positive sanctions to encourage behaviors it wants. So we usually think of sanctions as punishments, but they can also be rewards too. So praise, awards, bonuses, public recognition all operate as mechanisms of social control, but they reinforce behavior society views as desirable. Now, all of this shows that deviance and social control are inseparable. Dude, what did you get in your hair? Oh, it needs to be washed. So you cannot understand one without the other. Deviance marks the boundaries and social control polices them. So together they create a map that tells individuals Sheesh. No, I thought this one had a rubber band on it.
Um,
No, it
it
doesn't.
got so hard.
It hurts?
Yes, a little bit.
Okay. So together they create a map that tells individuals how to behave and what consequences follow if they do not. So at the heart of it is this: deviance is a mirror. It reflects the values, fears, priorities, and power structures of the society that labels it. When the mirror changes, the boundaries shift with it. This is why sociologists pay attention to what a society defines as deviant. It tells us what the society values, what it protects, and what it fears losing.
My hair.
So for section 7.2 in Connerly, when you look at deviance through a sociological lens, the key insight is that no behavior is inherently deviant. Instead, it becomes deviant once society interprets it that way. So section 7.2 takes the idea and shows how different theoretical traditions make sense of deviance using their own logic. So think of it as three different camera angles on the same phenomenon. Functionalism, for instance, starts with the assumption that even the stuff we dislike has a role in keeping the social system running. Durkheim's work threads through this perspective. He argued that deviance clarifies moral boundaries, affirms shared values, and even promote change by exposing what no longer works. Mommy made these braids tight, little dude.
Yes. It made it tighter.
Made them tighter.
Yes.
Okay.
I know.
So when a major scandal erupts and everyone unites in outrage, that reaction reinforces what society still cares about. Functionalists also point to how social structures influence criminal behavior. So Merton's string theory is a classic example of this. If a society promotes goals like wealth but blocks certain groups from achieving those goals legitimately, some individuals adapt by turning to deviant means. You can see this logic in neighborhoods where economic mobility is limited and people are told to succeed, but the structural barriers create tension between aspiration and opportunity. And some resolve that tension in ways the law disapproves. So conflict theory shifts the focus to power, inequality, and who gets to define deviance in the first place. Deviance is not natural here. It is political. Behaviors associated with marginalized groups tend to be criminalized and more harshly, while the harmful actions of powerful groups often escape scrutiny. And if you're living in the United States, you can see this a lot as of right now.
Dad.
Yes, little guy.
It hurts.
All right, I'm almost done with this part. Then I'm moving on to the next braid, all right? Come on, turn your head and stop moving, please. Okay? So the text in Connerly points out how laws can reflect the interests of those in power, and how enforcement falls unevenly across class and racial lines. So, a straightforward example is the policy on, how can I say this? On the uses of stuff that's not prescribed by a pharmacy. I think that's a better way to keep from getting flagged. So,
I'm really,
see what little dude?
I'm really tired.
Okay.
I know.
So, possession of certain substances historically linked to marginalized communities result in stricter penalties than substances used more often by affluent groups. Even when the harm is comparable, and from a conflict perspective, deviance becomes a label used to maintain existing inequalities. So, symbolic interactionalism, or basically symbolic interactionism, zooms in further, asking how deviance emerges in everyday interactions. If you have ever been misjudged or stereotyped, or you have felt, pretty much you know how this feels. You felt how, what this describes, this perspective describes. And Becker's labeling theory, which this chapter builds on, argues that deviance results from that label, not the act. Once someone is tagged as a deviant, people interact with them through that label, making it harder for them to escape the identity. The classic example involves youth who commit one relatively minor infraction. It teaches if teachers, police, or community members start treating them as troublemakers, the young person may internalize the role, eventually amplifying the very behaviors people feared. It becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. And Goffman's work on stigma deepens this idea by showing how certain identities mark people as socially tainted, shaping how others treat them and how they see themselves. So differential associations introduced by Sutherland adds another layer by showing that deviance... Oh, I think this is mad at little guy. Mama's going to have to take out this one, okay?
Okay.
All right, let's get to the next one. Different associations introduced by Sutherland adds another layer by showing that deviance can be learned through interaction. Criminal behavior is not mysterious or innate. It develops within groups that normalize or reward. If you grow up in an environment where friends or family routinely break rules or justify those behaviors, you absorb the logic behind them. Crime becomes an expected path, not an aberration. Echo, stop.
Dad.
Yeah, it's called the prayer dude, right?
That other brain.
Echo, stop.
Dad,
There we go.
that other brain is so hard.
Okay, sorry, little dude. So, taken together, these perspectives help you to see deviance as something society creates, interprets, and reinforces. Functionalism asks why deviance exists at all. Conflict theory asks who benefits from defining it. And symbolic interactionism asks how the label shapes the individual. When you combine those questions, deviance stops looking like an isolated wrong act and starts looking like a social process that reflects deeper realities about power, cultural meaning, and structural pressure. So, in section 7.3, Crime and the Law, when we move from deviance to crime, hold on, little dude. I got about 3 more braids, okay? If you're joining, just know that I'm doing my son's hair at the moment. Taking his braids down, and he has a lot of hair. So when we move from deviance to crime, we are not talking about 2 separate universes. Crime is essentially a subset of deviance, carved out by law. It is deviance that a society has decided to regulate formally. Connolly and colleagues emphasized that point early on. Societies draw legal boundaries around the behavior they see as dangerous, disruptive, or contradictory to, whatever the shared values are. And those boundaries shift across time and place. So this chapter starts by defining crime as behavior that violates a law and that is punishable by formal sanctions. That last part matters. So you may annoy people, for instance. You may embarrass yourself or even violate social expectations. But none of those becomes a crime until the state steps in with codified rules and enforceable penalties. So the distinction helps you see why cultures with similar moral values can still have a different legal system. What one society criminalizes, another one might regulate differently or not at all. And you could possibly even look at this even when it becomes down to topics such as polygamy or polygyny and in the Mormon context. And so what they practice, or what a few of them still practice as of today, is not considered deviance by nature. But when you start looking at the way that the laws interpret it in the United States, up under certain states and localities, then you see where the law has claimed it as it being a deviant behavior. So a useful way the text organizes crime is by separating violent, nonviolent, street, corporate, or white-collar crime. Violent crimes involve force. Xavier, it's not necessary, dude. Violent crimes involve force or the threat of force. For example, it includes assault, robbery, or even homicide. And these offenses tend to dominate media narratives. And it gives people the impression that they are more common than they actually are. So in reality, nonviolent crimes such as theft, fraud, or property damage occur more frequently. In the public perception, basically, versus statistical reality gap is something that the chapter hints at when discussing crime trends. Done with that one, little dude, okay? We're almost done. I think that one's matted at the bottom and Mama's going to have to take care of that, okay?
Okay.
So one of the more striking contrasts is between street crime and white-collar crime. Street crime is what most people imagine when they hear crime. And that's pretty much intentional. So it's mainly because it is visible, emotionally charged, and heavily policed. But white-collar crime committed by corporation or professionals can cause far more financial harm. Much, much, much more. So think about the difference between a person shoplifting a few items from a store or a corporation committing large-scale tax fraud, insider trading, or environmental violations. Got that rubber band?
I love
So,
you, Dad.
say what, little dude?
I love you, Dad.
I love you too, little guy.
It's so much.
So the former gets media attention and harsh penalties, and the latter gets a fine, settlements, or slow-moving investigations. The text underscores how power influences not only which actions are criminalized, but how they are punished. So you can see how, in certain instances, where they had the three strikes law, across the United States, and people who would, shoplift something three times. If they did it three times, they ended up with an extremely harsh penalty, and some of them would end up with life in prison for doing such a small act. And it could be something that's up under a very small amount of money, but it didn't matter. But somebody, let's say, even in the case of Enron, that cost billions upon billions of dollars, and a lot of those people that had to do with that only got a slap on the wrist. So another important theme is how societies collect data on crime. So Connolly and colleagues point to major sources like the FBI's Uniform Crime Reports and the National Crime Victimization Survey. The first reflects crimes reported to police, and the second captures crimes people experienced but did not report. So when you place those data sets side by side, the picture becomes more complicated. Many crimes never enter official statistics because victims are afraid, distrustful, embarrassed, or simply believe people will not do anything. And there's a lot of that. There's a lot of it. And so those gaps tell their own story about policing, community relationships, and social inequality. So the chapter also explores how criminality is shaped by factors like race, class, gender, and geography. So these influences show up not only in who commits crimes, but also who gets caught, who gets believed, and who gets punished more severely. So for instance, poor neighborhoods tend to have heavier police presence, increasing the likelihood that minor offenses will be detected and punished. Meanwhile, wealthier areas may rely more on private security or informal resolution. And as a result, two groups can engage in similar behavior with drastically different consequences. So finally, in this chapter of chapter 7, and this is section 7.3 that I'm talking about at the moment, Connolly et al. Reminds us that laws change over time because they are a reflection of cultural values, political priorities, and shifting norms. Alcohol prohibition, criminalization of banned substances, recreational substances, same-sex relationships, and even certain dress codes have moved in and out of legality depending on the era. So just like, what was once, acceptable in the 60s and 70s became unacceptable in the 80s. And you had a lot of different initiatives out there that targeted certain groups and certain groups of people and minorities and stuff. So when you track those changes, stop that, Xavier. When you track those changes historically, you see how law follows cultural meaning rather than leading it. So what society fears or seeks to protect becomes embedded in the legal code. So crime is not only a legal category, it is a social indicator. It tells you what a society values, what it is trying to regulate, and who has the power to define acceptable behavior. Once you see the law as a moving target shaped by social forces, the patterns of enforcement and punishment make a lot more sense. And hopefully my classes don't mind that I was doing hair this time. I'm probably going to have to do another video maybe tonight for another one of my classes. The psychology, no, it's the introduction to health psychology. And I still need to do that one. I meant to do a video last week, never got around to it. I had way too much stuff on my plate. And this was my one attempt on getting this video done. Stand up, Xavier. And this is the little boy's hair that I got going on right now. All right, sit down, little dude.
Oh, my hair.
And with that, I am going to call it a day. And for those who joined, thank you for joining, and thank you for listening.